One team, thankfully, that we know isn't going to make the playoffs are the Montreal Canadiens. But they've miraculously, under Marty St. Louis, turned into a really good team. Can we just talk a little bit about some of these bad teams or teams that were bad now looking sneaky good again? Let's start with the Habs.
I mean, yeah, like it seems like there's this trend in the NHL about bad teams going good. You mentioned Montreal. Then we're going to go to teams like Arizona, and the Oilers under Woodcroft are looking really good. I mean, before we get into it, is like the tank for Shane Wright just not a thing anymore?
Ottawa's winning that one.
Pretty.
But, yeah, it seems like all these other teams who are saying, yeah, we're going to get Shane Wright are veering further and further away from that.
You know, it might be a coincidence, but I wonder if for the first time in my life that I'm seeing all these bad teams starting to turn good again coincides perfectly with the fact that this draft is expected to be the worst draft in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
I wonder if teams aren't worried about being bad anymore because there's just no depth in this draft and they want to be bad for Connor Bedard.
Yeah, I think we're going to see a lot of bad teams next year. I think Arizona will be chief among them, but they're playing well right now.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the Habs, I think for me, are the epitome of a team that needed a change in their locker room, because last year they went on this cup run and they're granted no Price, no Weber, now no Sherrod. Their team did change, but a lot of their key guys are there, and Dominic Ducharme wasn't getting the best out of them.
Mm-hmm.
I think the biggest name and the most pressing example of that is Cole Caufield, who was in the AHL earlier this year and now can't stop scoring. Absolutely picked the corner against the Leafs yesterday when bar down. He's fantastic. Can you just talk a little bit more about kind of what's making this team tick?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, one of the biggest reasons is that coaching change. That spark is very important, but I think another reason why is because this team who relies on scoring from their first line is starting to finally get it.
Mm-hmm.
We'll mention recently, before we get into this, Montreal in their last 20 games are 10-7-3. Arizona's 9-11-0. They both have positive goal differentials, and I know anyone listening to this thinking that those records aren't great. Remember, these are two teams that are at the bottom of the basement right now. Being near 500 with the rosters that they have seems pretty stinking good. And going into the question about how, like I said, the biggest problems for these teams is that they have no scoring depth. These teams rely on first lines to score, and throughout the first half of the year, Montreal and Arizona's top lines were terrible. Nick Suzuki and Cole Caufield were so bad that Nick Suzuki got moved to the third line, was taken off the first power play. Cole Caufield got moved down to the AHL, as you mentioned. And now the top lines are starting to score. We see Cole Caufield with 13 goals, 11 assists in his last 20. Nick Suzuki has 13 goals, 11 assists in his last 20 as well. These guys are starting to click together. As we move into Arizona, your boy Clayton Keller has 11 goals and 15 assists in his last 20 with a plus-minus of 9 on a terrible team. Nick Schmaltz, who's been a fantasy god this year, has 14 goals and 15 assists in his last 20. Right, the point that I'm trying to make with all these stats is that teams relying on their first line to score are finally getting that production from them, which is why I think Montreal and Arizona are doing well. Now, the question is, will this continue sustainably for the rest of the year? Probably not. Not usually, these first lines will go dry some nights. Yeah. And good teams are able to get that scoring depth from the second and third lines, which these teams just don't have.
Yeah.
Right.
Arizona, I think, is making a good pitch for their 3,000 fans next year, so maybe they're going to actually sell out some games now that they're winning. But on a more serious note, it's been really interesting to see what Clayton Keller in particular has been able to do, because he came into this league as this really high skill finesse player who got paid big money a couple of years ago, and so it's good to see that. At least I know we make a lot of fun of Arizona, rightfully so, but it's good to see they have a guy that it looks like they can build around.
Yeah, I mean, Clayton Keller is quite honestly looking like the second best player drafted from that draft, next to Austin Matthews. Under him were Patrick Laine, Pierre-Luc Dubois, and I can't remember who went third.
Puljujarvi was there.
Puljujarvi. You could make a case that Clayton Keller is playing better than Pierre-Luc Dubois and Patrick Laine right now.
Yeah, right now, absolutely. And just touching back on the Habs, I wouldn't be surprised if they're competing for like a wild card spot next year, especially if they somehow manage to get a guy like Shane Wright. I feel like they'll be active if Kent Hughes wants to put his mark on this team. I think they are in a rebuild, retool phase. But when you have these guys scoring at the rate they're scoring at, if they get a healthy Carey Price, like I wouldn't be surprised. I'm not saying it's likely. I just wouldn't be surprised if they're making some noise next year.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think this team just got off to such a bad start that it was impossible to come back from it.
Haven't they doubled their win tally since like Marty St. Louis took over?
Yeah,
or something like that.
And with doing that, they were still the first team to be eliminated from contention.
That's so bad.
Right, that's just how bad that they were to start. And you know what? It might have been the first or the second. Arizona might have came first, but regardless, the argument is still valid. But okay, let's move over to another team that was bad and gone good. That is the exact opposite of the Montreal Canadiens, a team with first line scoring that has been there all year, but terrible goalie problems. Tell me why Edmonton has just turned it around in the Woodcroft era.
Okay. Well, before I give credit to the Oilers, because I have a tough time doing that. I don't know why I don't like the Oilers. I just don't. They're in, quite frankly, the worst division in hockey, and everyone around them, except for the Kings and the Flames, are sliding, and they're sliding fast.
Oh, the Kings are sliding too.
Well, exactly. Even more so to my point. Like, you have to be just average in that division to look good, and they'll probably get home ice being very average, but nonetheless, they have certainly improved over under Woodcroft. I remember hearing I think it was Derek Ryan who gave an interview saying like he really shaded Tippett. He said, now we actually know where to go in our own zone. So I'm starting to think that Jay Woodcroft has been able to implement some sort of defensive structure. Mind you, they got crushed by the Flames yesterday, 9-5. That could be just an anomaly against a really good team, but I think a little more structure in their game has gone a really long way to making them, what are they, 11-7-2 in their last 20, I think I checked, which, I mean, that doesn't sound great, but for that team in that division, that'll get you home ice advantage.
I mean, 11-7-2 means that you're getting points in almost 65% of the games that you're playing. Yeah. You keep that up for a whole year, you're making the playoffs.
For sure.
Right. Okay, let me move into why I think Edmonton is starting to be good. And quite frankly, I think it's because they have no choice.
Okay.
Let me explain that a little bit. The last time they won a cup was in 1990. Arguably, they have the two best players in the world on their team.
Arguably, yeah.
One inarguably and one arguably.
Yeah.
During their tenure, what have they done?
Made the second round once. And I know, let's just qualify this. We know the Leafs suck, but we're not talking about the Leafs. We're talking about the Oilers now.
Yeah. So the answer is nothing. The Leafs the Edmonton Oilers have done nothing in the Connor McDavid era. They've played 21 playoff games in the last 5 years and 8 in the last 4. What that means is that all of those games came from that run in 2016-17, like you said, where they went to a game 7, I believe, in the second round and lost.
Sounds right.
Right. They played 13 games in that playoff run, and since then, they've only made the playoffs in 2019 and 2020 and got swept once. Like, that's just unacceptable when you have a guy who's putting up 120 points here and another one who's not very far behind. It just seems like there's immense pressure on this franchise to do well, and they were living up to it at the beginning of the year. They started off at like 16-5-5 and then got to a point where they were out of a playoff spot, fired their coach, seemed to have hit rock bottom in the McDavid tenure. With this change in coaching, it just seems like this team had to have turned it around, because if they didn't, they would have been a mockery of the NHL.
It's true. I remember they talked about it. I stayed up for the late game yesterday to watch that 9-5, just insanely entertaining game. But they talked a lot about it on the broadcast too, that Jay Woodcroft coached a bunch of these guys in their AHL team.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, it was Puljujarvi, Yamamoto. I don't remember the other names, quite frankly, but it was like a handful of guys, and these are all important players now. I think even having that familiarity, the same thing happened. We saw the same thing with Keefe. Keefe coached a bunch of the guys on the Marlies, and he came in, he had an immediate impact, and a lot of those depth pieces started to find their place. They started scoring. They looked more comfortable. I'm sure that has something to do with their success too. Yeah, for sure. One other thing that is often overlooked is that, McDavid and Draisaitl have been stepping up over these last 10 games. That slide that they had hit, I know McDavid and Draisaitl were still McDavid and Draisaitl, but they had a couple games where they weren't putting up points and they were losing big. No kidding. In his last 10, McDavid has 6 goals, 12 assists, and Draisaitl's got 9 goals and 6 assists. Like,
I think these guys are stepping up because they know they need to make the playoffs.
Yeah.
And not only do they need to make it, they can't finish in the second wildcard spot because you know what that means. That means they're going to get swept again by playing Colorado.
Yeah, they need to qualify in their division. You're right. But the scary thing is, no matter where they finish in their division, they're playing Calgary in the second round, and that's going to be a tough one for them. It'll be tough for any team in the league. This isn't even a shout out the Oilers. We just talked about it. Calgary is probably one of the top 5 favorites to win the cup now, so it's going to be tough for them to get out, but I think, like you said, they have no choice but to at least make a push.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about bad teams going good. Let's flip the script here and talk about good teams gone bad. When I say to you, what's the quintessential example of a great team at the beginning of the year that has fallen off a cliff, what's the first name that comes to your head?
I'm going to think the team that can activate 2 of their star players, the Vegas Golden Knights. Am I on the same lines as you?
Great minds think alike.
Okay.
Vegas Golden Knights is the only correct answer. Here was a team that I believe had the second best odds of winning the Stanley Cup at puck drop at the start of the year.
Yeah, rightfully so.
Then got Jack Eichel, was leading the division throughout the first half of the year, and now they have the 7th best odds to win the Stanley Cup. They are actually put at a minus 220 betting odds to miss the playoffs.
Jeez.
What that means is that they are actually a favorite to miss the playoffs. You would have to put $220 to make $100 for them to miss the playoffs, which means that Vegas, as in like the casinos, Vegas, not the team, actually expects them to miss. They're plus 180 to make the playoffs. The Vegas Golden Knights have had an 8-11-1 record with a goal differential of -9 in their last 20 games in the worst division in hockey. What is going on?
I think when you have 2 of your most important players, 3 if you count Robin Leonard, plus some really important guys like Riley Smith, all on the IR, and you can't activate them because you tried to trade away Yevgeny Dadonov and forgot to read his contract. Like, I don't know how that even happens at the NHL level, but we'll glaze over that fact to touch on the more important fact that they have guys. I don't know if Mark Stone's ready to come back, but even if he was, he couldn't. They've had Alec Martinez, and you know this because you had him in fantasy for months. They haven't been able to activate him because they don't have the cap space. When you're playing with a glorified AHL team and your third-string goalie in net, because Brossoit's hurt too, you're going to lose.
Even in the worst division in hockey.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, they've been really, really bad, and I wonder if that glorified AHL team is a reason why their special teams are so bad. Vegas Golden Knights, throughout their relatively short tenure as a franchise, have relied on their power play, and those cup runs that they've made. I remember that power play being upwards of 29% in the playoffs.
Yeah.
And now their power play is at 18.2% in the last 20 games. That is 25th best in the league. Yeah. The only teams that are worse than them on the power play over that stretch are teams like the Philadelphia Flyers, Seattle Kraken, and Kings, like not teams that are projected to make the playoffs or win the Stanley Cup. Right? And if we move forward, the Vegas Golden Knights have a penalty kill percentage of 76% in their last 20 games, which is 21st best in the league.
That's not very good.
When you have a team that cannot score on 5-on-5, cannot score on the power play, and cannot stop goals from going in the net on the PK, it doesn't matter if you play in the NCAA. You're not winning games.
Maybe they can play Arizona next year. We both play in the NCAA when they're at the Arizona home arena. But that's it. That's a great point. I'm fascinated to see what happens with this team because we talked about it time and again. In this episode, we probably said it about 5 times. It's the worst division in hockey. So if they can even turn it around a little bit, they might be able to sneak in not only to a wild card spot, but like you said, if the LA Kings are starting to slide, this Vegas team, if they don't have to go on a run, they just have to be decent, they might find a way to sneak in. But that's asking a lot of this team right now.
Yeah, let's even move to the more intangible aspects of why Vegas is being bad. You mentioned this. To make matters worse, they paid for a team to take Evgeny Dadonov away from them. I think it was a second-round pick to take on that contract. For anyone that doesn't know, the trade later became null and void because they traded him to a team that was on his no-trade list. They just, quite frankly, forgot to read the contract. As you mentioned, Evgeny Dadonov heard that he had been traded in a practice while he was taking off his shin pads, and the first thing that he said, apparently, that the media broke was, that team's on my no trade list. I'm not going there.
That's crazy.
Right?
How does that even happen?
I just don't know. And now, it just cannot be a good feeling in the locker room to play for a team that doesn't want you there or to be a player on a team who knows that there's guys here that the organization paid to have them not here.
Yeah.
Right? What do they have? They have now about $400,000 in usable cap space to activate $9 million in Mark Stone and $4.8 million in Martinez, like you said. This might be a tough question to ask you on the air, but like, is there any way Mark Stone comes back?
I don't think so. I don't know if the plan was for him to come back in the regular season, but I just don't know, because they're gonna have to make roster changes to recall all these guys, and they don't, like you said, they don't make a little bit of money. Mark Stone's 9, Martinez is almost 5, Riley Smith is 5, Robin Leonard is, I think, between 5 and 6. That's a lot of money. And if they do, you can make trades after the trade deadline. You can, just that the players can't play for the rest of the season and playoffs. But these teams are gonna be able to ask the sun and the moon for Vegas. Yeah, you want to move Dodonov now? It's a minimum a first rounder, and I wouldn't do that if I was Vegas. I'd try and ride it out with the team that I've got. But you mentioned a funny point about Dodonov. I don't know what's going through his head, but he scored an OT winner yesterday to after a crazy comeback, and he also scored, I think, the first game after he got fake traded. So I don't know. It would be kind of a cool story to see him play a big role in the resurgence. But yeah, I don't know how I would be feeling if I was in his shoes.
It definitely can't feel good to be a guy that knows that the organization doesn't want you there. Now you have to come back to a team that isn't doing well and that clearly didn't want you there to begin with. But yeah, I love the Vegas Golden Knights. I really hope that they turn it around and make a push, but they're going to need to do a lot, because if they're playing with the roster they have now against the Colorado Avalanche, 4 games, bye-bye.
Yeah, lights out for them, 100%.